the night cafe in New Orleans. When the clock strikes midnight, the French Quarter of New Orleans seems to slip into another world. A place where soft jazz drifts from old wooden balconies, where the scent of roasted coffee mingles with the cool night breeze, and golden lamplight spills onto damp cobblestones after a gentle evening rain. At the corner of Bourbon and Royal, there's a little cafe called Loon Bluey Blue Moon. No flashing neon sign, no loud music, just a hand-carved wooden plaque and a warm yellow glow that seems to breathe. The cafe opens only from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m., and it never closes on rainy nights. They say Loon Bluey isn't just a cafe. It's a keeper of memories, a place people come to find something they've lost, or to forget something they can no longer hold on to. There's no set menu. The barista, an angular man named Etienne, asks each guest only one question: what do you carry in your heart tonight? And from the old espresso machine, Etienne pours a drink that feels as if it were made just for them. The woman in the red dress. That night, a light rain was falling. Drops pattered on the tin roof, creating a rhythm as melancholy as an offbeat blues tune. A woman walked in. She wore a velvet red coat, curls tousled at the nape of her neck, and in her eyes, an aching sadness known only to those who've loved too much. Etienne looked at her and gave a quiet nod. She took the seat near the window, placed a worn leather purse on the table, and sighed. "I'm carrying a love song I never finished," she said. Etienne smiled gently. He turned and began preparing a special brew. Strong black coffee with cane syrup and a touch of cocoa, bold, rich and sweet on the finish. She took a sip, then gave a small smile. She spoke of a blonde-haired man who used to play saxophone on a Decatur Street balcony, of sweltering summer nights and laughter echoing off checkered tiles. They had parted one rainy night, here in New Orleans over coffee too, but in another cafe another lifetime. Loon Bluey didn't ask questions. It didn't offer advice. Simply listened, like an old friend who doesn't need to understand everything, only to be there. The man with the broken watch. Around 2 a.m., after the rain had stopped and piano notes began drifting from a building across the street, a man stepped into the cafe. Gray trench coat. In his hand, a pocket watch that no longer ticked. Etienne didn't ask. He just looked into the man's eyes, where time had clearly stopped long ago. "I'm carrying a moment I can't let go of," the man said, placing the watch on the counter. This time, Etienne served a bold espresso with a slice of charred orange peel. The flavor called back brief memories. Mornings in a Paris train station, missed departures, words left unsaid. The man sipped, staring out the window where the moon now hung high. "I come back here every year on this day," he said. The day she passed. No one replied. An old jazz tune began to play again, and the broken watch sat quietly on the counter, a witness to something that once mattered deeply. The girl with the faded map. Near dawn, as mist began to settle on the old brick walls, a young woman entered with a backpack and a crumpled, singed-edged paper map. "I carry places I've never been," she whispered, voice like a breeze. Etienne brewed her something rare, coffee blended with lavender and chilled orange water. She smiled in surprise. "It smells exactly like a place I once dreamed of." Then she pulled out a notebook and began to sketch. Rooftops she'd never seen, cobbled streets, old-fashioned lanterns. No one knew whether she was drawing from memory or imagination. But the cafe was so still then, you could hear her pen sliding across the paper. The cafe at sunrise. As the sky began to lighten, Etienne turned the closed sign to face the street. The night's visitors left, each carrying something lighter in their hearts. The cafe returned to its quiet. Someday, if you find yourself wandering New Orleans on a sleepless night, if your heart feels heavy with something you can't quite name, try walking down Bourbon, turn onto Royal, and look for the wooden sign that says Loon Bluey. Step inside. And when Etienne asks, "What do you carry in your heart tonight?" just be honest. The coffee will be brewed, and the memory will soften at least until morning. When I walked into Loon Bluey that night, I didn't know why I was wandering the streets of New Orleans at nearly 3 in the morning. Maybe it was the steady sound of rain tapping on the hotel roof, making it impossible to sleep. Or maybe it was the heaviness in my chest, something I couldn't quite name, like a memory from an old dream quietly making its way back. I walked aimlessly down damp cobblestone streets, under lamplight the color of melting candle wax. The night breeze carried the scent of tobacco, vanilla, and somewhere, rising softly from a misty corner, the warmth of fresh coffee. I stopped when I saw it. Loon Bluey, the hand-carved wooden sign barely visible through the fog, as if it had been there long before the city itself was born. The door opened without a sound. Inside, a soft golden glow and the murmur of old jazz welcomed me like a whisper. The cafe wasn't crowded, just a few empty tables, a few wooden chairs creaking gently, waiting for someone to sit down. Behind the counter, Etienne looked up. His eyes were deep and still, as though they had seen countless sorrows and never needed to ask why. I sat down, my hands still trembling slightly from the cold. Etienne didn't ask my name. He simply said, "What do you carry in your heart tonight?" I hesitated. It was a question that sounded simple but was harder than any I'd ever been asked. I looked down at my hands, then back up at him, and answered slowly, "I carry a longing for myself." Etienne didn't reply. He just nodded softly, knowingly, then turned away into the back. I looked around the cafe. Old oil paintings on the walls, a phonograph slowly spinning a record, and a seashell lamp casting rippling light across the room. The space felt like it lived somewhere between memory and reality. A few minutes later, Etienne returned with a turquoise porcelain cup. Steam rose from it with a strange, familiar scent. Coffee, yes, but unlike any I'd ever had. There was something like ginger, like roasted chestnut, and just a hint of old paper, like the pages of a forgotten journal. I took a sip, and the memories came flooding in. I saw myself, a 12-year-old lying on summer nights, listening to rain drumming on a tin roof, dreaming of faraway places. I saw the faces of loved ones long gone, still smiling gently in a kitchen filled with the scent of baked goods. I saw years I had lived too fast, loved too hard, and lost without understanding why. And I saw myself now, adrift in the world, but still tender enough to find my way to a quiet cafe at 3 in the morning. I sat for a long time. No one disturbed me. No one rushed. It felt as though time inside Loon Bluey didn't move. It simply settled, like the final drop of coffee at the bottom of a cup. Before I left, I turned back to Etienne. "Thank you for the coffee," I said. It felt like a poem I once forgot. Etienne only nodded, his eyes unsurprised, as if he'd made that very cup for hundreds of lost souls just like me. I left Loon Bluey just before dawn. The sun hadn't yet risen, but the fog had thinned. I no longer felt alone, as if, in the rainy night of New Orleans, I had found a small piece of myself again, a fragment I dropped somewhere long ago. And if you asked me, is Loon Bluey real? I'd smile and say, maybe not. Maybe only those who carry a true longing in their hearts can find it. But if one night you pass a quiet corner and catch the scent of coffee lingering in the mist, step inside. Etienne might still be there, and he will ask you, "What do you carry in your heart tonight?" The second time I returned to Loon Bluey, it had been almost a year since the first time I stepped into Loon Bluey. The city was the same, damp, drowsy, and alluring like a slow, sorrowful jazz tune that never quite ends. I came back to New Orleans on a late autumn night, no plans, no appointments. Just a heart that had started to long for the sweet scent of coffee, for that little cafe where all things strange somehow felt familiar. This time there was no rain, but the air still carried that thick, old water scent, the kind only those who've wandered beneath the porches of the American South truly understand. I turned onto the corner of Bourbon and Royal, where the wooden sign of Loon Bluey still hung, like it had never left, like it had always been waiting. Inside, Etienne stood behind the counter, his thin hands quietly polishing a glass. He looked up, met my gaze, and offered a gentle smile. No surprise. No, "Oh, it's you." Just a nod, as if I'd only stepped out yesterday. I took the same seat by the window. Etienne placed a cup of coffee in front of me, this time without asking. The flavor was different. Stronger, a little bitter on the tongue, but strangely warm as it slipped down my throat. Like a greeting, like a quiet reminder I had changed. I was taking my second sip when a stranger walked in. A young woman, wearing a worn denim jacket, carrying a weathered leather-covered guitar. She went straight to the counter, set the guitar down beside a stool, and smiled at Etienne. "I carry a song I haven't dared to sing." The words made me pause. Something in her voice felt oddly familiar, like I'd heard it before. Maybe in a dream. Etienne nodded. He began preparing her a cup of coffee, and the aroma slowly filled the room. Cinnamon, nutmeg, and scorched vanilla. The girl sat at the table across from me. We sat in silence for a few minutes. Then she spoke. "You're someone who came back, aren't you?" I blinked, surprised. "How did you know?" She shrugged, smiled softly. "Here, I think Etienne can always tell who returns. The ones who can't stay away from memory." I looked at her more closely. Her eyes held a quiet sadness, but it was beautiful. Not the sorrow of a broken heart, but the kind worn by someone who had once carried music through empty train stations, who had sung quietly to herself in towns no one remembered by name. "Do you want to hear the song I haven't dared to sing?" she asked, gently. I nodded. She unlocked the guitar case, placed it across her lap, and began to strum. Her voice was low, warm, and trembling like a small fire in a windy night. The lyrics weren't complicated, just the story of someone who once loved New Orleans, and someone who loved a person who never came back. But when she sang, the room seemed to slow down. Everything outside, rain, wind, traffic, grew still, listening. Etienne quietly brewed more coffee, and I just sat there. My heart quietly moved in a way I couldn't explain. When she finished, she smiled and set the guitar down. That was the first time I dared to sing it in front of someone. I replied, "That was the first time I heard a song that felt like it came from my own dream." We didn't ask for each other's names. Maybe because in Loon Bluey names don't matter. Only the stories do. Before she left, she pulled a small piece of paper from her jacket, scribbled something on it, and slid it across the table to me. I opened it. Just a single line. "If you ever return, sit at the old table. I'll save you another song." Then she walked out, her guitar slung across her back, and the scent of vanilla coffee still hanging in the air around her empty chair. I stayed a while longer. Outside, the fog began to thicken, and Loon Bluey slipped quietly back into its own dream. The songs left unwritten. I returned to Loon Bluey for the third time on a cold night. December crept through the city like a stray cat, quiet, watchful, and just a little sharp along the spine. New Orleans wasn't bustling like it was during festival season. It had slowed down, breathing softly under dim streetlights and the distant echo of a train horn drifting in from the river. I didn't know why I came back. All I knew was that the small slip of paper still sat quietly in the old wallet. Her note. "If you ever return, sit at the old table." So I did. The cafe was emptier than usual. Etienne was still there, but tonight he made the coffee without looking at me, as if he too was waiting for someone else. She didn't come. I waited past 3 in the morning. Outside, the streets were coated in heavy fog, and wind slipped in through the cracks in the door. I was just about to stand when Etienne gently placed a small wooden box on the table.
No explanaschen.
She left this for you, he said. I opened the box. A soft-covered notebook lay inside, bound by an old rubber band. I removed the band, and I realized it was filled with handwritten sheet music. Songs. Dozens of them. Each page dated, some of them smudged with water. A few were just fragments of melody, unfinished lyrics. But one page stood out, marked more clearly than the others. At the very end, the title, Loon Bluey, a Symphony Without an Ending. The page was blank, except for one line. If I never come back, please finish this melody for me. I sat there for a long time. In my mind, the sound started to rise, notes flickering in and out, like a shadow of someone disappearing into the night, still trying to say something. I didn't know how to write music, but my heart began to remember her voice, every lyric she sang, every chord that drifted like ripples under the Bourbon Street Bridge. And so, I did something strange. I kept writing the song, not in notes, but in stories. The ones who come after midnight. After that night, I returned to Loon Bluey more often. Etienne never asked why. He let me sit at my usual table, served the same coffee as before, but one time, he added a thin slice of lemon. I asked him why. He simply said, "Some days, memory needs a little sourness to wake up." Every night, I opened the old notebook and wrote down a few more lines. Not poems, not lyrics, just fragments of conversations I overheard in the cafe. And then, I began to notice something strange. I wasn't the only one familiar to Loon Bluey. There was an older man with silver hair who always sat next to the piano in the corner. Never played, only polished the keys. There was a dark-skinned woman in a deep red coat, who placed a single jasmine flower on an empty table and waited, always for someone who never came. There was a young boy with an old film camera, taking pictures and never looking at a single one. I started asking Etienne about them, but he didn't answer. He only said, "They're just like you, still writing the missing parts of their own songs." And I realized, everyone who came after midnight brought a story. They didn't have to tell it. They just had to be there. And somehow, we became silent chords in each other's unfinished harmonies. The one who returned in the season of quiet winds. I continued writing that song for nearly a season. Each night, a few more lines. The notebook thickened with ink, with moments. And then one night she came back. No warning. No message. No note this time. I was just sitting with a cup of coffee gone cold, when I heard her voice behind me. The symphony without an ending. "Have you finished it yet?" I turned. It was her. Same guitar, same eyes, but something had changed. Her eyes were brighter, but somehow more sorrowful too. like someone who had crossed through too many places and too many goodbyes. I handed her the notebook. She flipped through it, slowly, reading every page. Then she looked up and said, "It's not music, but it's exactly what I needed." We didn't say anything else. She simply opened her guitar case, sat down, and for the first time, sang a complete song. No one in the cafe spoke. No one left. Only her voice remained, and the lyrics, born from all of us who'd ever felt lost, wove into one shared melody. The eternal loop. The Café Lune Bluey was no longer just a place for me to drink coffee. It had become a part of me, like breath, like the gentle breeze on the long streets of New Orleans, like a melody that never ends. Every night, I returned, not for the coffee, but for that silence, that unspoken waiting, and the dreams I seemed unable to escape. One night, when I walked into the cafe, everything was just like every other night. The air heavy with silence, Etienne was absent, and the girl with the guitar was nowhere to be seen. There were no familiar faces sitting quietly either. But this time, I felt something very strange. Something was waiting for me. That feeling wasn't just my own anticipation, but a collective sense. As though everyone in the cafe, even though unseen, was turning toward me. As if I was the only connection point in this space. I sat down at the old table, quietly scanning the room. Then, a soft sound came from behind, from the corner where the old piano stood. I turned around. Etienne was standing there, but he wasn't the same man I remembered. He no longer wore the dirty apron or the wool hat. His hair was longer, and his eyes, instead of the friendly smile, now held a coldness, as if he were no longer the Etienne I once knew. He just stood there, staring at me for a moment. Then he spoke. "You can't escape anymore, can you?" I remained silent. This cafe, the people here, they're all a part of you. You've become a part of it. I didn't understand. "What do you mean?" Etienne smiled, but it was no longer a warm smile. It was cold, like the broken streetlights outside. He walked closer to me and placed a piece of paper on the table in front of me. I looked at the paper and realized it was sheet music. But it wasn't like the music I had seen before. This was a song with no words, only notes that seemed to float, with no clear rhythm, no melody, no discernible structure. "This is the song you wrote, but you don't remember writing it," Etienne said, his voice deep and distant. "Every time you think you've escaped, every time you think you've finished, the song comes back." I stared at the sheet music. A deep sadness began to fill my heart. Not because of the notes, but because I realized Etienne was right. Every time I thought I had finished, thought I had left, I would return to this cafe, and I would continue writing the song. Suddenly, I remembered all the moments I had lived through in this cafe. The silent conversations, the glances exchanged, the quiet footsteps, and the strong, dark coffee pouring. I stood up and walked over to the piano. Once again, I sat down and placed my hands on the keys. Without thinking, I began to play. The notes rang out into the quiet space. But this time it was different. The notes were no longer untold stories, but lost memories. The sounds were not from my fingers, but from the people sitting in the cafe, from the souls who had passed through here. Each note intertwined, blending together, as if I was reliving the dreams I thought I had forgotten. And then, as the music came to an end, I felt something strange. I couldn't remember what I had played. The night grew late. The patrons began to leave, but they weren't in a hurry. They didn't turn to look at me, but I could feel that they were saying goodbye. When the song ended, I stood up. I didn't want to ask Etienne or anyone else anymore. I simply walked out, and this time I didn't turn back. The cold of New Orleans that night touched my skin, but inside, I no longer felt lost, no longer felt trapped. I knew I would never return, but I also knew that when I looked back, I would always carry this song with me as a part of myself. A song with no words, no end, but still echoing within me.